When truth is buried, the silence is demanded. We stand at our freedom's edge.
And this is our Freedom's Edge. Welcome to our Freedom's Edge, episode 16, The Cost of Looking Away. I'm Diane Bailey, and this is where courage meets conscience. There are moments when we know something is wrong. We see it, we feel it. Sometimes we understand exactly what is happening, and we still look away. Not because we agree with the harm, not because we are without compassion. Sometimes we look away because we're tired, because we're busy, because we're afraid, because helping may interrupt our plans, because speaking may cost us something, because the problem feels too large, because we tell ourselves someone else will handle it. And sometimes because looking directly at another person's suffering forces us to confront something about ourselves that we'd rather not see. We like to believe morality is measured by what we believe, by the causes we support, by the values we claim, by the things we would never personally do. But conscience is not measured only by the harm we commit. It is also measured by the harm we witness and choose to ignore. Looking away can feel passive. It can feel like doing nothing. But doing nothing is still a decision. And decisions have consequences. When we look away, someone else often pays the price. A child remains unsafe. A woman remains unheard. A veteran remains abandoned. A person experiencing homelessness remains invisible. A coworker continues being mistreated. A neighbor continues being targeted. A lie becomes accepted. An abuse of power becomes routine. A harmful policy moves forward without resistance. And every time that happens, the harm becomes a little easier to repeat. The first time we see something deeply wrong, we may be shocked. The second time, we may be disturbed. The third time, we may simply shake our heads. Eventually, what once horrified us becomes part of the background. That is one of the greatest dangers of looking away. It does not only abandon the person who needs us, it changes us. It dulls something inside us. It teaches us how to live beside suffering without responding to it. It trains us to tolerate what should never become tolerable. Most people don't wake up one morning and decide to become indifferent. Indifference usually develops slowly. It begins with small excuses. Hey, I don't have time. I don't know enough. I don't want to get involved. Oh, it's not my responsibility. Someone else is better qualified. It's probably not as bad as it looks. There's nothing I can do anyway. Some of those thoughts may contain a little truth. We cannot respond to every crisis. We can't save everyone. We cannot carry every injustice alone. There are limits to our time, our strength, our money, and our emotional capacity. But there is a difference between accepting our limitations and using those limitations as permission to stop caring. There is a difference between being unable to fix everything and refusing to fix anything. Sometimes the action available to us is small. We can ask a question, we can make a phone call, we can sit beside someone, we can report misconduct, we can interrupt a degrading comment, we can refuse to laugh, we can tell someone, I believe you. We can say, this is not acceptable. We can stay present instead of turning away. Small actions do not always feel heroic. Most of the time, they are not dramatic. They do not come with applause. They do not make the news, but they tell another human being that they are not alone. And sometimes that matters more than we realize. There was a moment in my own life that has stayed with me for years. I was living in San Diego when I was much younger, and I was trying to get an employment application to City Hall before the deadline. At that moment, the application felt urgent. I was focused on the time, focusing on getting downtown, focusing on finding parking, focused on reaching the office before the doors closed and the opportunity disappeared. As I hurried along, a homeless man approached me. He asked me for help. He did not simply ask for spare change and move on. He pleaded with me. He needed something from me in that moment. Maybe it was money. Maybe it was food. Maybe it was simply the acknowledgement that he was standing there and that his life mattered. But I was in a hurry. I told myself I couldn't stop. I had a deadline. I had somewhere important to be. I had something that could affect my future waiting at City Hall. So I passed him. I kept walking. I delivered the application. I met the deadline. I completed the task I had convinced myself could not wait. But afterward, I could not stop thinking about him. I remembered his face. I remembered his voice. I remembered the way he had asked me for help. And suddenly, that application did not feel quite as important as it had a few minutes earlier. I began asking myself questions I could not comfortably answer. What if he hadn't eaten? What if he was sick? What if he was frightened? What if he had reached the point where asking a stranger was the only option he believed he had left? What if I had been the final person he approached that day? I had treated my deadline as urgent, but what if his need had been more urgent? I went back looking for him. I backtracked. I searched the area where I had seen him. I walked the nearby streets. I looked for his face among the other homeless people around me, but I could not find him. He was gone. I don't know what happened to him. I don't know whether someone else stopped. I don't know whether he received the help he needed. I only know that when he stood directly in front of me and asked, I chose my own urgency over his humanity. And that is so difficult for me to admit. I have spent much of my life trying to help people who were ignored, dismissed, abandoned, or left behind. But caring about people in principle did not prevent me from failing one person in a particular moment. My education did not prevent it. My professional training did not prevent it. My belief in human dignity did not prevent it, because values do not live only in what we believe. They live in what we do when someone interrupts our plans. That man taught me something, although he never knew it. He taught me that the moments that test our conscience do not always arrive when we are prepared. They do not make appointments. They do not wait until we have finished our errands. They do not appear only when we have extra time, extra money, or emotional energy to spare. Sometimes conscience appears as a person standing between us and where we believe we need to be. Sometimes we fail. I failed him that day. I'm not telling this story to punish myself. I am telling it because regret can either become a place where we remain trapped or a lesson that changes how we live. I could not go back and redo that moment. I could not find him and offer what I had refused to give. But I could decide that the next person would not be so easy for me to pass. I could slow down. I could look directly at people. I could stop treating inconvenience as a reason not to respond. I could remember that what feels like an interruption to me may be a crisis to someone else. I still don't know that man's name. I don't know his story. I never asked. But I remember him. And perhaps that is part of the cost of looking away. Sometimes the person disappears from our lives, but the moment does not. One of the hardest truths is that good people can still fail other people. Caring does not guarantee courage. Education does not guarantee courage. Faith does not guarantee courage. Professional training does not guarantee courage. Past acts of bravery do not guarantee that we will act bravely in the next moment. We must choose again and again and again. That may sound exhausting, but it's also hopeful because it means one failure does not define us forever. We can choose differently next time. We can become more alert to the moment when our conscience is asking something of us. We can recognize the excuses we use most often. We can decide in advance what kind of person we want to be when the moment arrives. Moral courage is often rehearsed before it is required. We can practice speaking. We can practice noticing. We can practice asking whether someone else is safe. We can practice interrupting harm. We can practice tolerating discomfort. We can practice being inconvenienced. We can practice staying in the room when it would be easier to leave. We can also stop imagining that compassion must always be grand. Sometimes compassion is a meal. Sometimes it's a ride. Sometimes it is remembering someone's name. Sometimes it's standing between a person and humiliation. Sometimes it's telling the truth about what we witnessed. Sometimes it is simply refusing to allow another human being to disappear in front of us. There's also a social cost when entire communities learn to look away. A society becomes dangerous when people are trained to ignore suffering as long as it happens to someone else. We see this in the way people talk about poverty. We see it in the way people talk about immigrants. We see it in the way people dismiss racism, sexism, anti Semitism, homophobia, transphobia, and violence. We see it when the suffering of human beings is reduced to a debate. We see it when human lives become statistics. We see it when the first question is not who was harmed, but the question is, was that person one of us? That question reveals how easily morality can become tribal. We care when the person looks like us, votes like us, worships like us, lives like us, loves like us, served where we're served, belongs to our family, belongs to our neighborhood, belongs to our country. But conscience cannot be limited to people who resemble us. Human dignity cannot depend on whether someone is known to us. If another person must earn our recognition as human before we care what happens to them, then we are not defending dignity. We are rationing it. Looking away also protects power. Abuse survives when people stay silent. Corruption survives when people stay silent. Discrimination survives when people stay silent. Tyranny survives when people stay silent. Not every person who remains silent supports the harm, but the person causing the harm rarely needs everyone's support. They only need enough people to stay quiet. They need witnesses to doubt themselves. They need bystanders to remain uncomfortable but inactive. They need decent people to decide that speaking is too risky. They need institutions to value reputation over truth. They need families to protect the abuser rather than the person harmed. They need communities to tell victims not to make trouble. They need the rest of us to look away. When decent people withdraw, harmful people do not stop. They become louder. They become bolder. They begin to believe there will be no consequences. And oftentimes they're right. There's also a personal cost of looking away. Even when no one else knows what we failed to do, we often know. You remember that moment, the face, the question, the hesitation, the opportunity we had to respond. We may tell ourselves there was nothing we could have done. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes we know we could have done something. We simply chose not to. And that knowledge can stay with us. Not because guilt is always useful. Guilt can become destructive when it traps us in shame. But guilt can also be information. It can show us where our actions failed to match our values. It can reveal the distance between who we believe we are and who we were in a particular moment. The question is not whether we have failed. We all have. I have. The question is what we do with that failure. Do we defend it? Do we bury it? Do we rewrite the story until we are innocent? Or do we allow it to teach us? There will always be reasons to look away. The world gives us more suffering than any one person can hold. We protect ourselves by turning off the news, by scrolling past, by changing the subject, by avoiding the uncomfortable story, by deciding that another person's pain is too complicated. Some emotional distance is necessary. We are not built to absorb every tragedy. But distance must not become dehumanization. Protecting our own emotional health cannot mean training ourselves not to care. The goal is not to feel everything. The goal is to remain capable of responding when something is ours to respond to? That may be the central question. What is mine to do? Not everything, but something. What is mine to say? What is mine to interrupt? What is mine to refuse? Who is standing in front of me right now? What need is close enough for me to touch? What truth do I already know? What action am I avoiding because it may cost me comfort, approval, time, or safety? We must also be honest that sometimes responding carries risk. Speaking against power can cost a job. Defending someone can cost relationships. Reporting abuse can bring retaliation. Interrupting hatred can make us a target. No one should casually demand courage from another person without recognizing that cost. But we also cannot pretend that the absence of response is without cost. Someone always pays. When we remain silent to protect ourselves, the person being harmed may pay. When institutions protect themselves, victims pay. When communities avoid conflict, vulnerable people pay. When citizens avoid responsibility like voting, democracy pays. The choice is rarely between cost and no cost. The choice is often about who will carry it. Will the cost fall entirely on the person already suffering? Or will some of us agree to carry part of it? That is what solidarity means. It means refusing to let the most vulnerable person bear every consequence alone. Looking away is tempting because it allows us to preserve the image we have of ourselves without requiring us to act. We can still think of ourselves as compassionate. We can still say we oppose injustice. We can still believe we would have behaved differently in some great historical crisis. But history is built from ordinary moments. It is built from what people do before they know how the story ends. It is built from clerks, teachers, neighbors, nurses, soldiers, voters, parents, journalists, officers, judges, and bystanders. It is built from people who decide to comply and people who decide to resist. From people who look away and people who refuse to look away. Most of us will never be asked to perform one enormous act of courage. We will be asked to make smaller choices. Will we notice? Will we listen? Will we speak? Will we remain present? Will we allow inconvenience to become an excuse for indifference? Will we risk being uncomfortable? Will we act before we are certain someone else will join us? The cost of looking away is not always visible immediately. Sometimes the person disappears from our view and life continues. Sometimes it remains. It remains in the person who was abandoned. It remains in the institution that learned silence can be counted on. It remains in the culture that became a little more tolerant of harm. And it remains in us. The goal is not to live consumed by guilt. The goal is to remain awake, to understand that conscience is not merely a feeling, it is a demand. It asks us to notice. It asks us to examine our excuses. It asks us to respond when we can. It asks us to remember that another person's humanity does not disappear simply because acknowledging it is inconvenient. We won't always get it right. There will be moments we miss. There will be people we fail. There will be times when fear, exhaustion, or uncertainty wins. But we do not have to turn those failures into a permanent way of living. We can let regret deepen our awareness. We can let discomfort strengthen our resolve. We can decide that the next time we see someone standing alone, we will not make them invisible. The next time a lie is presented as truth, we will not silently accept it. The next time someone is degraded, we will not pretend we did not hear it. The next time conscience speaks, we will pause before we walk away. Because the cost of looking away is never only what happens to someone else. It is also what happens inside of us. Each time we ignore what we know is wrong, something in us grows quieter. But each time we respond, something in us grows stronger. And perhaps courage begins there. Not in believing we will always be brave, because we won't be, but in deciding we no longer want comfort, convenience, fear, or silence. Make our choices for us. This is our freedom's edge, where courage meets conscience. Stay awake, stay vigilant, stay loud, stay free, and stay on the edge with me.
When truth is buried, the silence is demanded. We stand at our freedom's edge.